If you'd asked me a week ago if anything would happen between me and Jake, I'd have laughed in your face. Not because I didn't want something to happen, but because that kind of fantasy doesn't exist in real life. Not when your best
friend is Jake. Not when he's straight. Jake and I met in high school over a stupid fight in gym class. He was all limbs and loud confidence, the kind of guy who laughed with his whole chest and never seemed to notice the way people leaned. And when he talked, I was quieter. The kind of quiet you learn when you're trying to make sure no one figures you out. We weren't supposed to be friends, but somehow, we just were. 18 years later, we still are. Jake is the guy who offers to carry your fridge up 3 flights of stairs and actually shows up. The kind of man who can talk about anything for hours, except feelings. He's had girlfriends, bad breakups, almost got engaged once. And through it all, I've been the constant. The best friend. The guy on the other end of late-night texts and impulsive road trips. So when he called last week, voice full of that familiar excitement, I didn't expect anything different. "Dude, you need a break," he said. I booked us a cabin up by Lake Harmon. No service, no emails, just beer, fishing, and 2 days off the grid. I should have said no. Every part of me that spent years tucking away feelings, folding them into tight, unreachable corners, told me this was a terrible idea. I've gotten good at keeping things platonic, at biting my tongue when he jokes about my terrible taste in men, at pretending the thought of his hand-brushing mine doesn't make my pulse trip, but he sounded so excited. And I'm weak when it comes to him. "Yeah," I said, forcing casual. "Why not?" I told myself it was just a weekend, just a cabin, just 2 old friends hanging out by a lake. I ignored the part of me that tightened with anticipation, that wondered if maybe, just maybe, being alone with him would feel different this time. I buried the hope, like I always do. And now here I am, in the passenger seat of Jake's dusty pickup truck, watching pine trees blur past the window, my stomach full of nerves I refuse to name. He's drumming on the steering wheel, humming, along to an old rock song, grinning like we're 18 again and the world is still simple. But I know better. The world isn't simple, and neither is this. The cabin looked like something out of a postcard. Chipped green paint, warped porch steps, and a screened-in door that creaked like it had secrets. Nestled right at the edge of the lake, it sat quiet and forgotten. Pine. Trees standing tall around it like sentinels. The air smelled like wet earth and wood smoke. And the lake stretched out in front of us like glass, unmoving and silver under the early evening sky. "Still can't believe you've never been here," Jake said, tossing the cooler from the truck bed onto the deck with one arm. "This place is my dad's old stomping ground. I grew up learning how to gut trout in that kitchen." "I think I'll pass on the gutting," I muttered, dragging my duffel toward the cabin steps. The boards creaked under my weight, just like he said they would. Familiarity lived in the way he moved here, like his body remembered every corner, every nail in the wood. It made me feel like an outsider in his memory. Still, it was beautiful. Quiet. Dangerous if I let it be. Inside was simple. 2 beds, 1 room, a fireplace made of stone, and shelves full of old fishing gear and mystery novels with dog-eared corners. Jake immediately pulled his shirt over his head, reaching into his bag for another. My gaze caught on the stretch of his back, the curve of muscle along his ribs. And I looked away too fast, the heat of embarrassment crawling up my neck. "You okay, man?" he asked, tugging on a fresh tea and turning to me. "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Just tired from the drive." He didn't question it. He never does. That night, after we fumbled through unpacking and lighting the fire, we sat out on the tiny wooden dock with 2 beers each, and the kind of silence that only exists between people who've known each other forever. The stars were ridiculous, thick and bright, scattered like sugar across the sky. The lake barely moved, holding on to the light like it didn't want to let go. Jake took a long sip of his drink and leaned back on his elbows. "Remember that girl I dated sophomore year? Emma, the one who was obsessed with astrology?" I snorted. "You mean the one who dumped you because Mercury was in retrograde?" "Hey," he laughed, pointing a finger at me. "It was a real planetary crisis, okay? That's what you get for dating someone who thinks your star sign determines your credit score." He laughed again, full and open, the sound bouncing over the water. I smiled. Couldn't help it. This part of him, this version that let the world fall away when we were alone, was the one I missed when we went too long without talking. Then he quieted, staring at the water. You ever wonder why you haven't had, like, a long-term thing? A real relationship? I blinked. The question hit too close, too fast. Where's this coming from? He shrugged. I don't know. You're great, smart, funny, good-looking. I mean, hell, if I were into dudes. I laughed. Too loud, too quick. Thanks, I'll add that to my Tinder bio. He grinned, but I could feel his eyes still on me. Seriously, though, you ever been in love? I hesitated. The truth sat at the back of my throat like a stone, but I forced a smile and said the safest thing I could think of. Just never found the right person. Jake nodded slowly, like he believed me, or wanted to. Neither of us spoke much after that. We finished our beers in silence, the lake stretching out before us like a secret neither of us was ready to name. The lake looked like a dream in the early morning. Mist floated low across the surface, clinging to the water like breath on glass. Everything was soft and slow. The ripple of a fish just beneath the surface, the quiet creak of the dock beneath our boots, the smell of damp pine and coffee rising from the thermos Jake handed me without a word. We'd barely spoken since, last night, there was a rhythm to early morning fishing that didn't require words. Jake baited the hooks with muscle memory and handed me my rod like we'd done this 100 times. We hadn't, but it felt like we had. I sat at the edge of the dock, line cast, shoulders hunched into the hoodie I hadn't zipped up. Jake sat beside me, his legs stretched long in front of him, one hand loosely holding his pole, the other wrapped around his mug. He looked out at the lake like it had answers. He exhaled. You ever think we peaked in college? I smiled faintly. Some of us didn't even get a chance to peak. He smirked. Nah, man, you're still climbing. I didn't respond, just watched the mist curl in tendrils around the rocks. After a long pause, he said, Work's been insane lately. My boss thinks I sleep in the office. You basically do. Jake chuckled. Guess I'll just die married to my job. Then he turned toward me, that grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, half serious, half something else. Unless you marry me. Save me from a lonely death, man. I laughed. Too hard. It burst out of me, loud and awkward, like a reflex, like a fire alarm you can't silence. I immediately regretted it. My pulse jumped, my grip tightened on the rod. Damn, Jake said, raising an eyebrow. That funny, huh? I cleared my throat. Yeah, I mean, come on. You proposing? To me? That's comedy gold. He didn't laugh. Not really. Instead, he just looked at me for a second. Too long. Too direct. Before turning his eyes back toward the water. His jaw shifted, like he wanted to say something else but thought better of it. The quiet that followed wasn't the good kind. We reeled in after a while. Neither of us caught anything. It felt symbolic somehow. Back at the cabin, Jake fried eggs and toast in the cast-iron skillet like he always did when we camped, like nothing had happened. But we moved around each other differently, more careful, like two people in a house of glass. He slid a plate across the table toward me. Eat. Thanks, I muttered. The only sound was the scrape of forks on enamel and the low hum of wind through the trees. We didn't look at each other much. Every time his shoulder brushed mine as we sat, my skin lit up like static. At one point, he opened his mouth like he was going to speak, then just chewed slower instead. The joke hung in the room like smoke, faint but lingering, curling into the spaces we didn't know how to fill. The storm crept in without warning. One moment the lake was still, reflecting the dusk like a mirror. The next, the wind kicked up, sharp and cold, sending ripples across the surface and whispering through the trees like something ancient. By the time we got back inside the cabin, the rain had started, heavy and steady, drumming on the tin roof like fingers tapping out a warning. Jake lit the fire while I searched for candles. We hadn't expected to lose power, but when the lights blinked once and then died for good, neither of us was surprised. Just another thing we didn't talk about. We didn't fish that day. We didn't talk about the joke either. By the time we settled in, whiskey poured, boots off, wrapped in the quiet flicker of candlelight and crackling logs, Something about the space between us had shifted. It wasn't tense exactly, just uncertain. Like we were standing on a frozen lake, and neither of us wanted to be the one to test the ice. Jake sat across from me on the old plaid couch, legs spread, one arm draped along the back. The bottle sat between us, half empty. His shirt was rumpled, hair damp from the dash inside. He looked tired, or maybe just unguarded. "This is nice," he said softly, staring into the fire. "Reminds me of summers with my dad, before things got complicated." I nodded. "Yeah, it's peaceful." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You ever get tired of being alone?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I admitted carefully. "But alone feels easier than being with someone who doesn't really see you." He glanced at me, just briefly. "Yeah." A pause. Then he said it. "I've been feeling lonely lately. Work's all I do. I come home to silence, fall asleep with the TV on. It's like, I don't know. I'm going through the motions." I swallowed. "You ever think about dating again?" Jake shrugged. "Not really. I tried the apps. Just felt fake. Empty." "You?" "Same," I said too quickly. He looked at me longer this time, his eyes searching mine. The candlelight flickered across his face, softening the sharp lines. "You ever been in love?" he asked. I looked down at my glass. My throat tightened. "Yes." His voice was gentle now. "With someone I know?" I didn't answer right away. The truth sat behind my ribs like something caged. "Yes," I finally said. Jake didn't flinch, just nodded slowly, absorbing it. "Why didn't you ever tell him?" I stared at the fire. The flames danced in the reflection on the window, wild and uncontained. Because I know he'd never feel the same. Silence stretched out between us, long and full and heavy. He didn't ask who, he didn't need to, he just leaned back again, exhaling like something had been confirmed. Not spoken, but confirmed. After a while, he poured us both another drink. His hand brushed mine when he passed the glass. Neither of us moved away. "Thanks for coming this weekend," he said quietly. "I know I kind of sprung it on you." I looked at him then, really looked. His face open, his mouth soft, eyes unreadable. "Yeah," I murmured. "Me too." We didn't talk much after that. The storm kept pounding outside, but inside the cabin, the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of the things we hadn't said, the kind of silence that knows how to wait. The storm passed in the night, leaving behind a stillness so pure it felt like the world had stopped breathing. I stepped out onto the dock barefoot, letting the wood cool my feet. The air was sharp with pine and dew. Mist rose lazily from the lake, curling around the rocks and reeds like smoke. The sky stretched wide and blue above us, scrubbed clean, like nothing bad had ever happened. Jake was already there, crouched at the end of the dock, trying to untangle fishing line from a twisted pile in his hands. He hadn't said much that morning, just a grunted morning and a handoff of coffee. But his silence wasn't cold. It was weighted, careful. I joined him, settling beside him on the dock. We worked in silence, untangling loops of monofilament, hands brushing. Occasionally, I tried to focus on the knots, not on the ache in my chest, not on the things I'd let slip last night. Then, without looking up, he said it. Was it me? My fingers froze. My heart felt like it had skipped something important. Like a beat, or a decade. I looked over at him. He was still staring at the fishing line, like it had asked the question itself. But his face was different, not teasing, not guarded, just open, cautious. I could have lied, could have deflected like I always did, but I didn't have the strength for it. Not anymore. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's been you for a long time." The words hovered there, weightless and irreversible. Jake's jaw tightened just slightly. He didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't pull away. He just looked out, at the lake. I didn't know," he said finally, voice low. "I mean, I never thought
I know, I whispered. I never wanted you to. He sat there for a moment longer, then stood up slowly and dusted off his hands. I'm gonna take a walk. I nodded, staring down at the lines we'd half untangled. Okay. And then he was gone, footsteps fading into the soft crunch of pine needles and gravel, leaving me alone with a heart that suddenly felt too loud. I stayed there on the dock for a long time, watching the steam lift off the lake like breath exhaled after holding it in too long. The fishing line dangled limp from my fingers. We never even put bait on the hooks. I thought about all the things I'd told myself over the years. That I was fine being just friends, that silence was safer, that he'd never look at me that way. I'd built my feelings into something private and silent and safe. And now that it was out, I wasn't sure what I'd done. That afternoon passed in fragments. I read without absorbing words. I made a sandwich I barely ate. Jake didn't come back until the sun was starting to slip below the treetops, casting long golden shadows across the cabin walls. He carried firewood in his arms, like nothing had changed, but everything had. He set the logs by the hearth, then turned to me. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not distant, just different, quieter than I'd ever seen him. We didn't speak until the fire was lit and we were both sitting in front of it, shoulders hunched, legs pulled up like we were kids again, hiding in plain sight. Jake broke the silence. I don't know what to do with this, he said, his voice soft, careful. I didn't expect it, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't owe me anything, I said quickly, too quickly. I didn't tell you to get something back. I know, he said. I know that, and I'm not mad. I'm not freaked out or anything, He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I need time to think. I nodded, even though the ache in my chest pulsed a little harder at the word think. Okay. We sat there like that, two shadows in firelight, the quiet crackling between us. And somehow, even though it wasn't the response I'd dreamed of, it was more than I'd ever expected. We didn't fish that day. The rods stayed propped by the door, forgotten, lines still tangled from yesterday. The lake was still and bright, the kind of morning that practically begged us to be out there, but neither of us said anything. We moved around each other in a quiet orbit, offering nods instead of words, giving space instead of explanations. Jake spent most of the day outside, chopping firewood that didn't really need chopping, pretending he wasn't thinking. I stayed, curled in the corner of the cabin with my notebook open, pen idle in my hand. The page in front of me stayed mostly blank, save for one sentence I kept writing and scratching out. Is this how it ends? I didn't mean romantically, that was never promised. But the friendship, the years of laughter, the late-night drives, the inside jokes, the way I could always count on him to show up. I wasn't sure if that would survive the weight of the truth I'd let slip. I kept thinking about Jake's face after I told him. Not angry, not disgusted, just stunned, like someone had held up a mirror he didn't know existed. I stared at the fire until my eyes burned, letting memory slip through the cracks. The first time I realized I had feelings for him, we were 17. We'd been out way too late at some party neither of us really belonged at, and he drove me home with the windows down, blasting some stupid pop song we both pretended to hate, but secretly knew all the words to. At a red light, he'd reached over and ruffled my hair like I was a kid. I still remember how warm his hand felt, how my chest had tightened in a way I didn't have words for yet. Then there was the time freshman year of college. We'd been drunk, crashed on the same couch after a football game. He'd rolled over and thrown an arm around me in his sleep. I hadn't slept at all that night. Just lay there, eyes wide in the dark, memorizing every detail of the way he breathed. And last winter, after his almost engagement fell apart, he showed up at my place in the middle of the night, soaked with snow, eyes red. I let him crash on the couch, like always. In the morning, he made pancakes with my terrible coffee, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this was enough. Those memories came back in pieces, like flickers on film. Not dramatic, just quiet, intimate, real. I'd carried them alone for so long I almost didn't know what it felt like to share the weight. And now that I had, I wasn't sure what would remain.
By late afternoon, Jake came in briefly to grab another beer and didn't say much. I offered a small smile. He returned it, kind, hesitant, and then walked back out onto the porch. I didn't follow, and I didn't say anything more. Not because I didn't want to, but because I loved him enough not to make him choose. If being quiet meant keeping him in my life, even just as a friend, then I'd do that. I'd done it for years already. The sun had slipped behind the trees by the time I made my way back to the dock. The sky glowed with the last embers of day, streaks of violet and orange fading into a deep, endless blue. The lake reflected it all, still, like glass. Every now and then, a ripple broke the surface, but mostly it just held the sky quietly, the same way I'd been holding everything else. I sat at the edge of the dock, feet dangling over the water, hands resting in my lap. No notebook, no distractions, just the sound of the night breathing, insects humming, distant rustling in the woods, the soft creak of the dock under my weight. I wasn't expecting Jake to come, but he did. I heard his footsteps behind me, slow and hesitant. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, close but not quite touching. He let out a long breath and tilted his head back to look at the stars. "They're brighter out here," he said quietly. "Like they're not trying to compete with anything." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to apologize. Part of me didn't trust myself to speak at all. He was quiet for a while, then said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about it being me." I didn't look at him, just stared at the way the starlight shimmered on the lake. Jake continued, his voice low, measured. "I thought I knew myself, you know? Thought I had it all figured out. I liked girls, dated them. Thought that meant I had the rest sorted." He paused, then glanced at me. "But since you said it, I can't stop thinking about how I felt when you told me. Not freaked out, not grossed out, just surprised. Like you held up a version of me I hadn't even considered." I finally looked at him. His face was open in a way I rarely saw. No defenses, no jokes, just honesty. Raw and unpolished. "I don't know what this means," he said. "I'm still trying to untangle it. I've never thought about guys like that, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, about us, about how this weekend felt different." My heart pounded in my chest, unsure whether it wanted to leap forward or retreat into silence again. "I don't know if I'm what you need," he continued. "And I don't want to say I can give you something I'm not sure I understand yet. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to pretend nothing's changed. I want to figure it out. If you'll let me." There was a long silence after that. The kind that isn't empty but full of everything words can't quite touch. And then, without saying anything, I reached for his hand. He looked down at it, then at me, and he let me. He didn't grip it tightly, didn't make some grand gesture. He just let our hands rest there, side by side, skin brushing skin. A quiet yes, in a language only we could understand. We sat like that for a long time, the stars overhead, the lake holding our reflection like it had been waiting for this. Moment two, whatever came next, it wouldn't be simple. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking alone. We woke up in separate beds. The sun filtered in through the thin cabin curtains, casting long golden stripes across the floorboards. Outside, birds were already busy with the morning, the lake a mirror again, calm and untouched. I rolled onto my side and stared at the ceiling for a while, waiting for the weight to return. The awkwardness, the doubt, the quiet panic that always came after letting myself hope, but it didn't come. Instead, it was replaced by something smaller, lighter, like the beginning of a thought that hadn't quite formed yet. I got up to find Jake already in the kitchen, barefoot and messy-haired, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. He glanced up when I entered, then handed me one without saying anything. Our fingers brushed, and this time, he didn't look away. "Thanks," I said. "Yeah," he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't know how you took it, but I guessed." "You guessed right." We stood there in the warmth of the fireplace's last embers, not touching, not running, just standing and smiling. Small, crooked things. Nothing dramatic. But something had shifted undeniably. The silence was softer now, not full of fear, but possibility. Packing was quiet, but not heavy. He made a few jokes. I teased him for leaving his socks under the bed. He stole a bite of my granola bar. It felt like us, but with something new curled quietly in the corner. Not quite ready to speak, but very much alive. We loaded up the truck and started the drive home. Trees blurred past the windows, and the road unspooled in front of us like it always had. But I felt different in the passenger seat this time. Halfway down the highway, somewhere between a gas station and a half-forgotten song on the radio, Jake spoke. "Can we take it slow?" I looked over. He was gripping the wheel with one hand, the other resting palm up between us on the console. Not reaching, just there. "I just want to try," he said. "No promises, I want to see where this goes. With you." I nodded. "Yeah, me too." We didn't say anything else for a while. Just drove through the afternoon sun, windows down, the wind tugging gently at the corners of everything I used to be afraid to feel. And for once, I wasn't the only one wondering what if.